On the morning of February 19th, 1945, at Red Beach 2 on Iwo Jima, Captain Masao Hayauchi found himself witnessing something that defied every tactical principle he had learned during his years at the Imperial Military Academy. From his concealed bunker overlooking the landing beaches, he gripped his field glasses and watched in growing disbelief as American vessels performed what should have been impossible. These machines were not merely approaching the shore in the conventional manner of landing craft. Instead, they were emerging directly from the Pacific waters and continuing their progress inland as though the fundamental boundary between ocean and land had somehow ceased to exist. The trucks had to be sinking, Hayauchi told himself. Surely they would become disabled any moment now. Japanese artillery would obliterate them during their vulnerable moments at the water's edge, just as doctrine predicted. Through his binoculars, the captain observed these six-wheeled vehicles rising from the waves themselves, their cargo decks laden with ammunition and medical supplies. They rolled up the volcanic sand that Japanese engineers had specifically calculated would trap conventional wheeled vehicles. Hayauchi had accumulated 15 years of military experience, spanning campaigns across China and the fortification of numerous Pacific islands, yet he had never encountered anything that so completely violated the established laws of amphibious warfare. What he did not yet comprehend was that 2,300 of these DUKW vehicles were about to fundamentally transform the Pacific War's most brutal battles, converting traditional obstacles into mere highways for American logistics. These were not landing craft that halted at the beach. These were not amphibious tanks designed for combat. These were trucks that treated the ocean as simply another variety of road to be traversed. The tactical crisis this morning would trigger in Japanese defensive doctrine cannot be overstated. Everything the Empire had perfected since 1943 regarding island fortress strategy was about to face systematic demolition. The mathematics of Japanese defeat were being inscribed not in the quantity of Marines capable of storming ashore, but rather in the endless, uninterrupted stream of supplies that could now flow directly from ship to front line without pause or vulnerability. This revelation had begun as dawn broke and the first waves of landing craft materialized through the morning mist. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Ishikawa, positioned within the elaborate tunnel complex beneath the island's airfields, had been studying American invasion preparations through careful periscope observations. His defensive plans, painstakingly developed over 8 months of preparation, had been founded upon a single inviolable principle that every military professional understood. The beach represented where invasions were either won or lost. Every calculation, every gun placement, every defensive position had been designed around this fundamental truth. The beach defences constructed on Iwo Jima represented the culmination of Japanese tactical evolution following the catastrophic failures at Tarawa and Saipan. Rather than meeting the Americans at the waterline with massive banzai charges that had proven so costly and ineffective, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had implemented a defence-in-depth strategy. Artillery positions had been meticulously concealed within caves, positioned to generate interlocking fields of fire across every metre of the landing beaches. Machine gun nests had been integrated into reinforced concrete pillboxes that could withstand tremendous punishment. Even the volcanic sand itself had been weaponized, its consistency calculated to exhaust infantry and bog down any vehicles that attempted to cross it. The entire defensive philosophy centered on a concept that seemed unassailable. The transition from sea to land represented the moment when attacking forces achieved their maximum vulnerability. Major Yoshitaka Hori, stationed on Chichijima serving as Kuribayashi's logistics coordinator, had invested months calculating the tonnage requirements for an American assault of this magnitude. His communications with Kuribayashi demonstrated the sophisticated understanding Japanese planners possessed regarding amphibious limitations. The Americans would require approximately 500 tons of supplies daily to maintain any offensive momentum. Traditional landing craft could deliver perhaps 200 tons under perfect conditions. Beach congestion would inevitably reduce this capacity by half. Time, weather conditions, and Japanese artillery would accomplish the rest. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. The Americans would strangle on their own supply lines, but the DUKWS obliterated every single calculation. These vehicles, designated by an incomprehensible American acronym that translated to nothing meaningful in Japanese military terminology, carried 2.5 tons of cargo or 25 fully equipped troops. They could swim at 6 knots through water and drive at 50 miles per hour on roads. Most critically, most devastatingly, they required absolutely no unloading at the beach. There was no vulnerable moment of transfer, no congestion at the waterline, no pause where Japanese artillery could concentrate fire on static targets. Captain Hayauchi transmitted an urgent message to General Kuribayashi's headquarters at 0930 hours on February 19th. "The enemy employs amphibious vehicles that do not stop at the beach," he reported. "They proceed directly inland with full cargo intact. Our beach obstacles prove completely ineffective. Artillery cannot track them during the water-to-land transition. Request immediate tactical revision." No tactical revision could possibly compensate for what the DUKWS represented. They were not merely vehicles, not simply another piece of military equipment. They constituted a complete reimagining of amphibious warfare itself. The Japanese had invested 2 years perfecting defences specifically designed to counter traditional landing craft. They had studied the operational patterns of Higgins boats and LCMS. They had calculated the time required for unloading operations. They had identified the vulnerability during transfer operations. They had mapped the bottlenecks at the beach. Every calculation, every assumption, every defensive principle was now obsolete. The first profound shock arrived with the medical evacuations. Within mere hours of the initial landing, wounded Marines were being transported directly from battlefield aid stations to hospital ships offshore. There was no waiting for landing craft to complete their delivery runs and return. No exposure on the beach while casualties accumulated. DUKWs converted into ambulances simply drove directly to the wounded, loaded them with care, and drove straight into the ocean toward medical facilities. Lieutenant Toshio Abe, a medical officer attached to the Japanese Naval Landing Force, observed this process from a concealed position near Airfield No. 1. His post-war interrogation would reveal his profound dismay at what he witnessed. The Japanese had calculated American casualties based on inevitable evacuation delays. Wounded men would accumulate on the beaches, they had reasoned. Morale would collapse as Marines watched their comrades suffering without immediate help. Instead, their wounded simply disappeared into the sea within minutes of being hit. It appeared as though the ocean itself had somehow become their hospital, swallowing casualties and returning them to care with impossible speed. The ammunition supply system proved even more devastating to Japanese plans and assumptions. Traditional amphibious assaults absolutely required ammunition dumps established on the beach, vulnerable concentrations that represented prime targets for artillery and counterattack. DUKWS eliminated this vulnerability entirely. They drove directly from supply ships offshore to artillery positions inland, delivering shells to within yards of the guns themselves. No stopping, no transfer, no accumulation of supplies in vulnerable locations. Colonel Takeichi Nishi, the Olympic equestrian who had been converted into a tank commander, reported to Kuribayashi on February 21st from his position near the eastern beaches. "The enemy's artillery never lacks ammunition," he observed with barely concealed frustration. "Our counter-battery fire strikes empty beaches. Their supplies flow like water finding its own level, impossible to dam or divert or stop." The DUKW's ability to adapt to changing conditions proved equally shocking to Japanese observers. When volcanic ash clogged conventional vehicle air filters, DUKW crews simply drove into the ocean to wash them clean, then continued operations. When Japanese artillery managed to zero in on beach unloading points, DUKWs dispersed along miles of coastline, entering and exiting the water at unpredictable locations that made targeting impossible. When rough seas threatened to halt traditional landing craft operations, DUKWs rode the waves, their boat-shaped hulls managing conditions that would have completely suspended conventional operations for hours or days. Their flexibility seemed limitless. Sergeant Yoshio Yamada of the 145th Infantry Regiment, one of the precious few Japanese survivors of the entire battle, described watching DUKWs operate during a brief lull in fighting on February 24th. They moved like amphibious ants, he would later recall, endless lines from sea to shore to battlefield, and back again in perpetual motion. We could destroy one vehicle, perhaps two, even 10 if we concentrated all our fire, but dozens more continued regardless. They made the ocean itself a highway, and our island merely a destination along their route. The origin of these remarkable vehicles proved as extraordinary as their battlefield impact. In 1942, a yacht designer named Rod Stevens, a British sailor named Dennis Puliston, and an MIT engineer named Frank Spear had proposed mounting a watertight hull on a standard GMC truck chassis. The American military initially rejected the concept as impractical, too ambitious, too unconventional. Only when a Coast Guard patrol boat ran aground off Provincetown and an experimental DUKW successfully rescued the crew in conditions that defeated conventional boats did the military recognize the vehicle's true potential. The vehicle was developed in just 38 days, a speed of innovation that Japanese military bureaucracy could never have achieved, even in peacetime. General Motors would eventually produce 21,147 DUKWs. Each individual vehicle required 18,000 separate parts assembled in factories scattered across America. The engine, a 270 cubic inch GMC Model 270 producing 91 horsepower, was identical to the one used in standard military trucks, ensuring that spare parts and maintenance expertise were readily available everywhere American forces operated anywhere in the world. The Japanese had actually attempted their own amphibious vehicle program in response to observed American capabilities. The Type 2 Suki, manufactured by Toyota, was designed to fulfill a similar role in supporting amphibious operations. But Japan managed to produce only 198 units between 1943 and 1944, and most of these precious vehicles were lost when American submarines sank their transport ships before they could reach combat zones. The Suki's 2-ton capacity was inferior to the DUKW's capability, and its complexity made field repairs nearly impossible in combat conditions. Captain Hiroshi Kuwahara, a technical officer who had worked directly on the Suki project, was captured on Saipan and later interviewed extensively about Japanese amphibious vehicle development. "We understood the concept perfectly," he explained, but lacked the industrial capacity to execute it. Each Suki required precision parts we could barely produce in peacetime. The Americans built thousands while simultaneously fighting a global war. This was not a difference in technology, but in industrial philosophy itself. The impact of DUKWs extended far beyond mere logistics to influence the entire strategic shape of Pacific battles. On Saipan in June 1944, the appearance of DUKWs had already begun to systematically unravel Japanese defensive planning. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito had positioned his 32,000 troops based on traditional amphibious assault patterns that had held true for decades. The beach defences were designed to create a killing zone during the critical unloading phase when attacking forces were most vulnerable. Colonel Takuji Suzuki, Saito's chief of staff, had spent weeks carefully calculating the time required for Americans to establish supply dumps, the vulnerability of those dumps to artillery fire, and the inevitable logistics crisis that would slow the American advance to a crawl. Every calculation was based on sound military principles and historical precedent. The first DUKWs arrived at Saipan's beaches at 0852 on June 15, 1944. Within 4 hours, they had delivered more ammunition to marine artillery positions than Japanese planners had estimated could possibly be landed in 2 full days of operations. The continuous, uninterrupted flow of supplies enabled American forces to maintain relentless pressure without the operational pauses that Japanese defense in depth absolutely required to reorganize and mount effective counterattacks. Major Kiyoshi Yoshida, intelligence officer for the 43rd Division on Saipan, wrote in a report that was never transmitted due to his death in the final Banzai charge. "The enemy's amphibious trucks make all our calculations meaningless," he observed. "We prepared for an enemy that must pause to build supply dumps. Instead, they advance with their logistics, like a river that somehow carries its own banks forward." The 476th Amphibian Truck Company, an African-American unit operating DUKWs at Iwo Jima, exemplified the vehicle's complete transformation of amphibious operations. On February 19, 1945, they began operations under intense Japanese fire from multiple concealed positions. Their DUKWs were specially modified to carry 105mm howitzers, weapons that traditionally required extensive beach preparation before they could possibly be landed safely. The howitzers were firing from positions inland within hours of the initial landing, something Japanese defensive doctrine had deemed physically impossible given the weight and complexity of the weapons. Technical Sergeant William McBride of the 476th later recalled the visible Japanese reaction to this development. "You could see their confusion even from a distance," he remembered. "Artillery appearing where no artillery should exist. Supplies flowing where no road existed. We weren't just invading their island, we were rewriting the fundamental rules of warfare." The DUKW's psychological impact on Japanese defenders matched their practical effect on operations. The vehicles represented something beyond mere military capability or tactical advantage. They embodied an entire industrial philosophy that rendered Japanese defensive doctrine obsolete at its foundation. Every DUKW demonstrated American mass production capability, standardization across manufacturing, and mechanical reliability under combat conditions. They were not specialized military equipment requiring dedicated facilities, but militarized commercial vehicles, suggesting an economy that could convert civilian production to military use without strain or disruption. Lieutenant Tadashi Komatsu, an engineer officer who survived the battle for Guam, was interrogated extensively about Japanese defensive preparations. He revealed a profound demoralization among technical officers who understood exactly what DUKWs represented. "When we saw the amphibious trucks, we knew we faced not just an army, but an entire industrial system," he explained. Each vehicle provided proof that America could transform any mechanical concept into thousands of functioning machines. The maintenance and repair procedures for DUKWs provided another shock to Japanese observers accustomed to complex, specialized military equipment. Unlike sophisticated military hardware that required specialized parts and expertise, DUKWs used standard GMC truck components throughout. A damaged engine could be replaced with one from a regular truck. Tires were interchangeable with thousands of other vehicles in the American inventory. The propeller shaft was merely a modified truck drive shaft. This standardization meant that DUKWs damaged by Japanese fire were often repaired and returned to service within hours rather than being written off as total losses. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack and was now serving as a staff officer in Japan proper, received regular reports about American amphibious operations across the Pacific. He later wrote in his memoirs about the profound implications he recognized. "The Americans had achieved what we never understood was possible," he reflected, "the democratization of amphibious warfare itself. Any mechanic could repair their amphibious vehicles. Any soldier could operate them. They had removed the specialization that we believed amphibious operations fundamentally required. The production statistics told a story that Japanese industrial planners could barely comprehend even when presented with the raw numbers." The Pontiac East Assembly Plant in Michigan initially produced DUKWs alongside regular trucks, converting existing production lines rather than constructing new specialized facilities. Workers who had been building commercial trucks on Friday were building amphibious vehicles on Monday with minimal additional training. The conversion required no new specialized training, no special tools, no fundamental changes to the assembly process itself. In stark contrast, each Japanese Suki required specially trained workers using precision tools in dedicated facilities that could produce nothing else. The St. Louis plant alone was producing 300 DUKWs per month by 1944. Colonel Masahide Ando, who had overseen military production in Japan, learned about American DUKW production capacity while a prisoner after the war. He recorded his reaction in his prison diary. "They built amphibious vehicles the way we built bicycles," he wrote, as if such complexity were routine manufacturing. The central tire inflation system on DUKWs represented technology that Japan had not even contemplated implementing. Drivers could adjust tire pressure while driving, reducing pressure for soft sand and increasing it for roads with the flip of a switch. This technology, which Japan had not mastered even for fixed applications, was standard equipment on every single DUKW. It represented not advanced engineering requiring years of research, but thoughtful design and the practical application of existing technology to solve field problems. Major Kenji Hatano, captured on Okinawa, had been responsible for vehicle procurement for the 32nd Army. During interrogation, he repeatedly returned to this single feature with evident frustration. Adjustable tire pressure while driving, he kept repeating. We could not produce reliable tire valves for standard fixed pressure. They had mastered variable pressure as routine equipment available to every driver. Each small detail showed that the gap was not in theoretical knowledge, but in industrial capability and design philosophy. The beach conditions at Iwo Jima had been carefully chosen by Japanese planners specifically to defeat wheeled vehicles of any type. The volcanic sand, mixed with ash from Mount Suribachi, created a surface that conventional trucks simply could not navigate. Japanese engineers had tested captured American vehicles on similar terrain, confirming that wheeled transport would bog down within meters of the waterline. The entire defense plan depended fundamentally on this natural obstacle. General Kuribayashi himself had walked the beaches personally, feeling the sand between his fingers, confident it would trap American vehicles exactly where Japanese artillery could destroy them. DUKWs defeated the volcanic sand through a combination of design features the Japanese had not anticipated. The six-wheel drive provided traction when 2 or 4 wheels would have failed completely. The central tire inflation system allowed drivers to reduce pressure until tires became improvised tracks spreading weight. The vehicle's weight distribution, designed primarily for flotation, also prevented it from sinking into soft surfaces. Corporal Hideo Takayama, an artillery observer who survived by hiding in a cave system, watched DUKWs operate on terrain that stopped Japanese vehicles cold. They drove through volcanic ash that swallowed our trucks to the axles, he recalled. When they got stuck, they deflated their tires and crawled out like tracked vehicles. When they reached solid ground, they re-inflated and continued at full speed. It was like watching vehicles transform themselves to match whatever terrain they encountered. The supply figures achieved by DUKW companies were staggering by any measure. On February 24th alone, DUKWs delivered 8,000 tons of supplies from ship to shore, more than the entire Japanese garrison had consumed in the previous month of operations. This included 100,000 gallons of water, critical on an island where fresh water was almost completely non-existent. Traditional landing craft could never have maintained such volume while under continuous fire. Japanese planners had calculated that water shortages alone would weaken American forces within days of landing. Instead, DUKWs created an endless pipeline of fresh water from ship to shore. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Hayashi, intelligence officer for the Naval Guard Force on Iwo Jima, calculated supply rates from a concealed observation post before being killed on February 27th. His notes, recovered from his body, showed increasing desperation with each entry. Enemy supply rate 300 tons per hour, he had written. Our disruption effect negligible. Ammunition expenditure to stop one vehicle 40 to 50 rounds. Vehicles available appears unlimited. Tactical recommendation no solution within current capabilities. The DUKWs also fundamentally transformed American casualty rates by enabling rapid evacuation unprecedented in amphibious warfare. Traditional amphibious assaults saw wounded accumulate on beaches, waiting hours for landing craft to complete delivery runs and return for evacuation. Many died from treatable wounds due to delays in receiving proper medical treatment. The Japanese had carefully factored these inevitable delays into their defensive calculations, knowing that mounting casualties visible on the beach would severely demoralize attacking forces. DUKWs converted to ambulances could evacuate wounded within minutes of injury. They drove directly from aid stations to hospital ships, maintaining a stability that prevented further injury during transport. The vehicles were equipped with stretcher racks, plasma bottles, and even surgical equipment allowing treatment to begin during the journey. Dr. Masaru Ineoka, a Japanese surgeon captured on Saipan, was forced to treat American wounded and directly observed their evacuation system. Their amphibious trucks functioned as hospitals that could swim, he marveled. Wounded who would die waiting for evacuation in our army were in surgery within an hour of being hit. They had eliminated distance itself between battlefield and operating room. The night operations capability of DUKWs proved particularly demoralizing to Japanese defenders who had counted on darkness to reorganize and resupply their positions. DUKWs, equipped with infrared lights invisible to Japanese forces, continued operations 24 hours a day without pause. Supplies flowed ashore continuously regardless of visibility. Wounded were evacuated in complete darkness. Artillery received ammunition for pre-dawn bombardments. The Japanese, who had always used night as their primary ally for infiltration and surprise attacks, found that darkness no longer provided any sanctuary or advantage. Captain Yoshimasa Wada, defending the approaches to Airfield No. 2 on Iwo Jima, reported to General Kuribayashi on February 25th. The enemy maintains full logistics operations in complete darkness, he noted with frustration. Our night counterattacks find their positions fully supplied with ammunition, as if anticipating our movements. They fight a continuous battle, while we fight a series of daily battles separated by night. Time itself has become their weapon. The repair and maintenance infrastructure for DUKWs demonstrated American organizational capability that stunned Japanese officers who understood logistics. Mobile repair units accompanied DUKW battalions, carrying comprehensive spare parts, inventories, and specialized tools. Damaged vehicles were repaired directly on the beach or towed to repair areas by other DUKWs. The interchangeability of parts meant that several damaged vehicles could be cannibalized to create one fully functional unit. This contrasted sharply with Japanese equipment, where damage meant total loss. Major Ichiro Yamaguchi, a logistics officer who had studied at the German War College before the war, understood the full implications. He wrote in his diary before dying in the final desperate attack on Iwo Jima. Each broken vehicle becomes parts for others, he observed. Nothing is wasted. They practice industrial warfare while we practice spiritual warfare. The outcome was predetermined before the first shot was fired.